Привіт, I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a Ukrainian-American. I was baptized with the name Yaroslav, which is also the name I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. I grew up speaking Ukrainian in the house, was encouraged to embrace the culture that led to me becoming a history teacher, but I also developed a fascination with Slavic folklore and mythology, partially because there wasn't a lot of information on it, and partially because there's a lot of contradictions, which I keep trying to sort out. So I'm kind of playing history detective. And what I did in a previous video is I was talking about household spirits, particularly the domovic or the domovoi. And he's the guy that lives either in or near the oven and safeguards the family. It turns out there's a whole bunch of other household spirits that inhabited the Slavic world. And so I thought we'd take a look right now at the rest of them. And we're going to start with the Kikimora, who is the wife of the domovic. Descriptions of the Kikimora vary. She could be small with long hair and chicken's legs and a long beak-like nose, or she might have the snout of a dog, a chicken beak, can even resemble a goat-like entity with glowing eyes and horns. In fact, it can take on any part of an animal's face or body. It's always feminine, so that's why I'm referring to her as she, and can appear as an old woman or a beautiful girl. She might even appear as a deceased family member. So where does she hang out? Well, she could be behind the peach. Hey, and that's where the domovic tends to go, or at least, the most common belief. Or in the cellar, or she's hiding under the floorboards. And you'll hear her at night, just like with the domovic, except that what's happening is you'll end up hearing noises like mice trying to get a hold of food. So I would imagine little squeaking noises and a little bit of rustling. So if you're hearing that, you might not be hearing mice, you might be hearing her. And you can tell she's been around because there's wet footprints. All right, and she can be either a good spirit or a bad spirit, and that's going to kind of depend upon the behavior of the owner. When the house is in order, she looks after the chickens, and she sometimes helps with household chores, such as spinning at night. Although there's a negative side. If things are going bad, they're spinning at night, but nothing is being produced. So I guess that's just making noise. She could haunt a household if, for instance, if a woman is not keeping the house proper, and keeping it clean, or if the husband is lazy or abusive, or if the children are poorly disciplined. And usually the way to get her to mellow out, or maybe just to get her to leave entirely, is to do the exact opposite of what you've been doing. She in some ways has similar functions as far as consoling family members, or explaining tragic events, or explaining the loss of stuff around the house. The Kikimora can also be linked to nightmares, and the root word has to do with nightmares. She apparently can bring on some of the worst of them, either torturing people in their dreams or getting people to doubt their spouses. Interestingly enough, she can appear to men in the form of a beautiful woman torturing them with desire and dragging life out of them. And in Polish folklore, mora are the souls of living people that leave the body during the night. You can see them as wisps of straw or hair or moths, which apparently are really freaking scary in Slavic folklore. So when you're looking at the Polish folklore, but there's also the Czech, and there's the Romanian, and there's a number of them that, kind of focus on the Kikimora as the Mora, the nightmare creature, or the night hag. She'll be showing up through the keyhole and sits on the chests of the sleepers, and that fits with a lot of different paintings that you see of people depicting nightmares, or artists depicting nightmares. And to repel a mora, apparently what children were supposed to do is you're supposed to look at the window, or you turn your pillow and you make the sign of the cross on it, and that was going around at least in the 19th century. Sometimes what people would do is they would turn a broom upside down, and that's supposed to make the mora go away. Or you put your belt on top of the sheets. Or there's apparently like elaborate prayers that can be said to also kind of make the mora go away. There's a couple of different kinds of kikimoras. All right, we've been talking about the household one, and then there's that variant that does the nightmares. Well, we already talked about one that lives in the swamps. She was described as small, ugly, hunchbacked, scruffy old woman, pointed nose, disheveled hair, witch stuff. All right. She was supposed to use moss and grass as clothing, and she was supposed to frighten people and knock travelers off the road and even drown them. All right, lots of fun stuff there. So the next spirit we're going to look at doesn't live in the house. He lives in a low-lying building called a banya, and that's a bathhouse. It's a lot like a Finnish sauna. There's a wood-burning stove in there. You're traditionally using birch. You're really heating up the water so that there's all kinds of steam going. You're taking bundles of dried birch leaves called venke and dipping them in the water. And you're either thrashing yourself with them, or, if there's someone else with you, you're just beating each other up. And this is supposed to help flush out the toxins. And ideally, you go jump in cold water. Okay, so you've got a special spirit that lives there called a banik. The bathhouse, or banya, was a place of divination and magic, endowed with vital forces, so it's not unreasonable that it has a spirit. The banik is that spirit. He's usually described as a small, naked old man with a long beard, his body covered in the birch leaves left over from well-used bath brooms, but he might appear as a familiar person in the banya to someone who stumbles across him. He might even look like a stone in the oven heating the bathhouse. All right, there's a number of rituals that are performed to keep the banik happy and peaceful. And probably the most common one is to have the third or fourth firing of the banya be reserved just for him. And you were supposed to leave soap, boiling water, and you were supposed to leave the venke, the birch leaves that people are thrashing themselves with. And you're supposed to exit, bow, and give a formal thank you. And then don't go in there, because the banik is going to invite forest spirits to come hang out with him while he's doing his bathing. And, since he doesn't want to be alone. So since he's inviting in all these spirits, you don't hang Christian images in the banya. By the way, if you interrupt him, a couple of things could happen. You can get boiling water dumped on you. You might get strangled. So this was like a real spooky place. There was a lot of magic associated with the bathhouse. A lot of Slavic peasants considered it unclean, which is kind of interesting because you go there to clean yourself. But despite this is where women often would give birth. And there was also a belief that the banik wasn't going to be truly happy or settled until someone gives birth in his bathhouse. Women were supposed to practice divination there, but then there's another account that, pretty much anybody can get a foretelling of the future by going there, and you expose your back and you go to the half-open door of the banya, and if you feel like a gentle patting on your back or a soft and furry touch, you're going to have a good future. If you feel claws, things are going to go bad for you. He also might give you rings, but you got to be careful about the rings. There was a tale, or a number of versions of this tale, of a beautiful young woman who thought she was awarded a ring, and she was found with her fingers all locked together by iron rings. There's other accounts of elderly women or evil women being found peeled to death. So, a lot of drama going on there. Now, if the Bannock is really upset, the banya burns down. The fires are common anyway. Come on, let's face it. You're building fires in a building, and you'll leave it sort of semi-attended. And so what ends up happening is, as the new place is being built, one is supposed to sacrifice a cockerel around where the oven would be, or the kiln would be, and also blini. All right, so those would be sacrificed. Okay, so the Bannock may also have a wife, maybe not. Depends on which version you end up reading. These next three spirits are gonna kind of resemble each other as far as having similar functions. The Ovinik, he's a malevolent spirit that lives in the threshing house. His name comes from ovin, or barn, and he usually lives in a corner of it. And he looks a lot like a disheveled, half-wild black cat. You know, he might choose to burn the barn. He's not necessarily all that nice. So farmers ended up keeping fires lit around the threshing barn, or in the threshing barn, and you're supposed to take care of your stuff. If the Ovinik decides to light the fire, he's generally going to mess up and burn the barn down. So in order to, get on his good side, you're supposed to also sacrifice a cock as you're rebuilding the barn. And he seems to have kind of a connection to the Bannock, in that apparently on New Year's Eve, you could basically determine your future, how the year is going to go, by what kind of a touch you would end up getting, like on your back. So if it's a warm touch, hey, good times. And if it's a cold touch, you got some unhappy times ahead of you. So now we get to the last two spirits, the Vasily and the Dvorovik. The Vasily, he's a spirit that is associated with the horses on the farmstead. Because of his association with the horses, he doesn't have feet, he has hooves. And if you're a farmer and you hear the tinkling of sleigh bells in the middle of the night, and you hear the dogs barking in the dark, they're reacting to the sleigh bells, don't worry. That's the Vasily taking out the horses to exercise them in the snow. Okay. The Dvorovik, he's associated with the farmyard, and so the cattle shed and the barn and the yard itself. And so he's kind of similar to the Domovik, the household spirit, but he's nowhere near as benevolent. He's nowhere near as nice. He can be a danger to the livestock. There's some accounts that say he's particularly a threat to animals with white fur, but for some reason, and some of the other accounts, he prefers white hens. So again, it depends on which version you get a hold of. He can be appeased with bread and friendly talk, maybe giving him some some wool or something shiny, and that might calm him down. But there's a story of how a Dvorovic once fell in love with a beautiful mortal woman, and he used to braid her hair, and they lived together for years. And then one day she married a mortal, and that did not please the Dvorovic, who, when she combed out her hair and she's sitting on the wedding bed, he got into the house and used her hair and strangled her with it and left her on the bed. Sometimes to punish a Dvorovic, because you don't really want to get rid of them entirely because apparently they had some useful functions, you might stick a pitchfork in a fence, which creates an interesting image, or you might end up beating him with a whip, but the whip has got to include a thread from a winding cloth, which makes that sound pretty grisly. Or, which sounds even more charming, you hang a dead magpie in the yard. Okay, so now we've taken care of household spirits in the Slavic world. We're going to move on to other mythology. I hope you stick with me as I continue to explore the Slavic world.